Wait, he's not interested in retaking Seoul? Really? Huh? He just wants to kill as many Chinese as possible. Okay, well, that's, morbid. Yeah. Okay, bye. February 4th, 1951. The UN forces are once again advancing. The resurrected North Korean army is collapsing, and the communist Chinese are in a panic. Yet, all of this takes a backseat to the most important event of all. This week, Edward Almond falls on his ass. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the North Koreans fighting 10th Corps around Wonju were routed, and 8th Army Commander Matt Ridgway's first big push north since assuming command began in the west, and made good but slow progress. How does it turn out for him this week? Well, some of the first news Ridgway gets as the week gets going is that more and more hostile divisions are appearing on the front line, trying to check his advance, as well as the 3 divisions of the PVA, or Communist Chinese 50th Army, in his center. The North Korean 8th Division has been detected on the advance's left flank, and 2 divisions of the PVA 38th Army on the right. Sharp counterattacks by these units, especially with mortars and light artillery, disrupt the UN advance and keep gains to a minimum for the rest of January. Despite this, though, the communist forces are still not presenting a clear front to 8th Army. Their troops are arranged in disparate, isolated formations, more designed to harass and annoy the advancing troops than to stop them. The upshot of this is that the UN forces can still basically go where they want, but are battling increasing resistance as they get closer to their destination. Ridgway is becoming more and more convinced that the Chinese, for reasons he can only speculate upon at this point, are not going to seek a serious battle south of the Han River. And he is right about that. So he makes the decision to transition his advance into a general attack. The bulk of 1st and 9th Corps, which have so far been holding back at Line D, are now given permission to march up and begin setting up a new line along the ground gained, though they will not be joining offensive operations just yet. Ridgway does, however, release a number of tank battalions to 1st Corps Commander Frank Milburn and orders him to prepare an armored thrust along the west coast to expedite the advance and to recapture Kimpo Airfield and Incheon, main supply hubs. Now, UN Forces Commander Douglas MacArthur wants to keep pushing until some equilibrium with the Chinese lines is found, basically to advance until they are forced to stop. Ridgway is very much against this. He does not want to occupy arbitrary locations like Seoul or the 38th parallel, or to advance up to the main Chinese line of resistance. To him, this means the UN forces would become predictable and allow Chinese Commander Peng Dehuai to choose the battlefield for their next big clash. If you think back to the disasters of November and December, letting the Chinese pick the battlefield nearly cost the UN the war. So Ridgway instead is intent on picking a line that he wishes to defend, sitting there and daring the Chinese to attack. His goal is to destroy his enemy, not paint the map blue. One of the great temptations of command is to occupy territory because it looks so good on a map. It takes a Napoleon to say, "Never mind towns, bring me prisoners." Ridgway conceived his mission as less the liberation of Seoul or the regaining of the 38th parallel, and more the destruction of the forces opposing him. His advances, therefore, were carefully constructed and kept limited. They were designed to take full advantage of UN firepower, of artillery, armor, and air strength. Casualties were to be kept to a minimum. If the UN was going to fight China, it could never have enough manpower to waste it. Ground itself was unimportant. Destroying the Chinese armies and leaving nothing behind as guerrillas was important. We saw a couple of weeks back that Ridgway replaced 9th Corps Commander John Coulter with Bryant Moore, and this week Moore arrives. He assumes command January 31st, and in the next few days, he pushes the 2 attacking divisions of 9th Corps north until they're no longer lagging behind 1st Corps to their west. By the end of this week, the 2 Corps' front line is just south of Anyang, only around 16 kilometers short of the Han River. At this rate, they should reach the river next week and move on Incheon and Kimpo Airfield. The UN Air Forces have done a great job thus far, providing both close air support and also successfully interdicting communist forces trying to cross the river. So the communists are having trouble bringing more divisions into the combat zone and extricating units that are spent. But there is a hiccup now. Aerial recon detects large numbers of troops massing in the areas near the boundary between 9th and 10th Corps, to the north of the village of Chepyong-ni. 10th Corps Commander Edward Almond is aware of these reports and believes that they're remnants of the defeated North Korean 5th Corps, so he's not too concerned. He thinks, well, they've already been in heavy combat with 10th Corps forces for the better part of the last 2 weeks, and they've come off far worse than we have, so what is there to worry about? But distant recon also shows that large formations of Chinese troops are beginning to move south from the northeastern reaches of Korea. This is the PVA 9th Army Group under Song Shi-lun, which engaged the U.S. Marines at the Chosin Reservoir in December. They've been resting around Hamhung and Wonsan since that bloody battle. And if they're now moving south towards the front lines, despite the supply issues down there, that can only mean that Peng Dehuai is about to make his move. To hopefully foil the reorganization of the North Koreans and also disrupt Peng's plans, Ridgway orders Almond to prepare an offensive with 10th Corps and ROK, or South Korean 3rd Corps units. This will hopefully bring his troops in line with Milburn's and Moore's to his west, tighten up the Corps boundaries, and give Peng something to think about. A busy battlefield this week, and there's much more action still to talk about. But let's take a break to talk about something equally thrilling: bickering at the UN. The long-running argument between Britain and the United States over Chinese aggression, or lack thereof, comes to an end this week. In a British cabinet meeting in London last week, the cabinet voted, without Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin present, to reject any condemnation of China if such a motion also contained a call for additional sanctions against China. This position is by no means representative of British attitudes as a whole, and actually threatens to destabilize the British government. Hugh Gaitskell, Chancellor of the Exchequer, who understands the value and necessity of American cooperation more than most, even threatens to resign over the issue, fearing that a dramatic break with the U.S. would only embolden the anti-European elements within Congress. If that were to happen, all NATO security plans in Europe could be thrown into chaos. This is also the last straw for U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson. He has been, to his credit, very sensitive to British interests up to this point, and has been very patient when it comes to their concerns over Hong Kong, relations with Beijing, and fears of a nuclear demonstration in China. Acheson and others in the U.S. government have assured Britain on multiple occasions that condemnation of China would not be a prelude to an expansion of the war, and that the British would not be asked to break dialogue with Beijing, nor to enact any sanctions greater than what they were already doing. On the contrary, Acheson has argued that getting this declaration done would satisfy public pressure for a diplomatic response to China's intervention in Korea and allow actual, fruitful discussions to begin. Acheson's patience has now run out. London is quietly reminded that a report on NATO defense needs is soon to go through U.S. Congress, and that if Britain were to split with the U.S. over this, now, then future American military assistance for Europe may be in jeopardy. The British understand the subtext of this message loud and clear, and a compromise between London and Washington is rapidly hammered out and passes the UN this week, on February 1st, much to Acheson's relief. The resolution mostly satisfies both sides, condemning Chinese aggression, as the U.S. has demanded, while only criticizing China for not accepting the ceasefire committee's principles rather than rejecting them. This, of course, leaves the door open for those principles to be revised and dialogue to continue, which partially satisfies Britain and India. The whole episode showed how small was the area of maneuver open to the major allies. Few shared the U.S. attitude towards China, but none could finally contemplate a break on the issue. The U.S. was vital to global security against the Soviet Union. In contemplating a gesture of independence, Britain merely came face to face with its dependence on American military and financial aid. The saga has ended with a dent to British prestige, but at least they have managed to somewhat soften the U.S. response to China. It also becomes clearer to India that it's the U.S. pushing this resolution through the UN and not something London is enthusiastic about. Hopefully, that will mean that relations within the Commonwealth are not strained too badly. In truth, though, India's hopes to play peacemaker have been somewhat fanciful from the start. This isn't because Mao Zedong's Communist China and the US are hell-bent on a third world war, but that China's motivations in joining the conflict are more multifaceted than anyone really gives them credit for, as I've talked about several times before. Korea has a long history of Chinese influence and domination, more than just about anywhere else. Chinese machinations here extend beyond any sense of ideology or political system, but rather to what many Chinese would consider the natural order of things. The ceasefire group and its supporters underestimated the strength of Chinese xenophobia. Emerging from a century of foreign domination, China was determined to reassert its traditional influence in the region against the established power of the US. Although both the US and the UN refused to admit the fact, they were resisting neither communism nor aggression, but the re-emergence of China. As long as Chinese armies were advancing, compromise was impossible, and those who attempted to bridge the gap, such as India, were distrusted and condemned by both Washington and Beijing. But back to the bloody business of battle. To round off the week, let's take a look at Ned Almond and 10th Corps. Almond, acting on Ridgway's orders to support the advance in the west, has begun pushing his forces north as the remaining troops of KPA 2nd Corps melt before them. Those KPA troops, by the way, largely return to guerrilla warfare and will struggle to stay alive in the local area under pressure from constant patrols by the 1st Marine Division to their south. The Marines in general are not particularly keen on helping Almond with his advance, and their commander, O.P. Smith, has even told Ridgway that he and his men want nothing to do with Almond after the debacle at the Chosin Reservoir and the evacuation from Hungnam. It is now the U.S. 2nd Division has conflicts with Almond. Okay, he already had a couple of run-ins with 2nd Division's officers in the fight around Wonju. Earlier in January, Almond wanted to visit parts of the division, basically to stamp his command on it. On January 9th, he had his first encounter with commander of the 2nd Division's 23rd Regiment, Paul Freeman, and did not exactly endear himself either to Freeman or the troops. Arriving while they were fighting the KPA over a series of hills south of Wonju, he quickly began criticizing most of what 2nd Division was doing and barking orders at random troops and officers. Finally, Almond and his team decided to leave. On the way down the hill, they ran into one of Freeman's sergeants. Almond, as Freeman remembered it, decided to make small talk about how cold it was. "It's so cold that the water froze in my trailer this morning," Almond said, an attempt to buddy up, Freeman thought, and a poor one at that. "You're goddamn lucky to have a trailer and a basin of water," the sergeant answered. It was icy and treacherous moving down the hill, and Almond slipped, going down right on his butt. Freeman extended a hand to help him up. "If I need your help, I'll ask for it," Almond said. A great first meeting, Freeman thought to himself. Well, Almond's troops creep forward even before he gets the orders from Ridgway to plan his offensive. And this week on January 30th, motorized patrols of 10th Corps make it up to an area just south of the village of Chipyong-ni, a region defined by 2 large railway tunnels. It is here that Almond believes KPA 5th Corps is massing. His patrols soon encounter the troops that have been gathering here, but to Almond's surprise, they are not North Koreans, but Chinese men of the PVA 42nd Army. The PVA troops quickly cut the withdrawal route of the patrols and begin assaulting positions near the tunnels, and only withdrawing to the hills after air support and reinforcement troops arrive to help the defenders. Almond responds by ordering Freeman's 23rd Regiment to advance to the area, sniff out the Chinese, and destroy them. Colonel Freeman sends forth his 3rd Battalion and the attached French Battalion, and on February 1st, they run into the PVA 125th Division. The Chinese partially encircled them at the twin tunnels and attack the UN forces from the northwest. The battle drags on all day and is brutal at stages, but eventually, UN artillery and air power yet again make the difference. The Chinese call off their assault before nightfall. The UN forces take around 260 casualties, and Freeman estimates PVA casualties at 3,600. Another stark reminder to the Chinese of what American artillery and planes can do when given the chance. By the end of the week, Almond's forces along the rest of the line have caught up. The 2nd Division holds his west, the 187th Regimental Combat Team, along with the ROK 5th and 8th Divisions in the center, near Hongsong, and the 7th Division southwest of Pyeongchang. The ROK 3rd Corps has also come up southeast of Pyeongchang and hopes to take it as part of the coming offensive. The main concern of 10th Corps now will be an attack on Hongchong, which Almond believes the KPA 5th Corps are defending, to be carried out by ROK 5th and 8th Divisions and supported by American artillery and air power. The operation, approved by Ridgway and dubbed Operation Roundup, is to begin tomorrow, February 5th. And that is it for this week of the war. UN forces have again advanced in the west and now also in the center. Chinese resistance seems to be token rather than serious, and there is real hope that the communist forces might be spent. But they are not. In fact, one reason why Operation Thunderbolt in the West has been progressing so smoothly is because Peng Dehuai does not care about the land south of Seoul where Ridgway is advancing. His eyes are firmly set on the central corridor of Korea and Almond's advancing 10th Corps. Peng wants Wonju, the crossroads of Korea, the town that, in his own words, will carry us all the way down to Daegu. Where the KPA have failed, Peng means to succeed, and Almond is none the wiser to what the Chinese have planned. Well, he will find out soon enough, because as this week ends, on the eve of Almond's offensive, a force of over 100,000 Chinese troops is marching into his sector and preparing an offensive of their own. Whew! Thrilling stuff! And you know to keep coming back week after week so I can cover it all the way to the end. I can do that thanks to the Time Ghost Army. That is what finances all of our productions. Martin Mullaney is the Army Member of the Week, and these are the newest commissioned officers. You too can join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And hey, speaking of our productions, we have just launched a brand new series called War to War that you are sure to love. Go and check it out right here. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.